Folks, David here on the Vintage Future once again, and today I'm really excited to share with you my 1937 Levi 501s. This is a historical reproduction by Levi's Vintage Clothing, otherwise known as LVC, and this represents my favorite historical jean. There's a lot of jeans that I like from past history, but this one takes the cake, and it's even my favorite Levi. Like if you were to just talk Levi's jeans, it's my favorite model of Levi ever. And that is because there are so many juicy details in this particular pair, so many incredible design features that you don't necessarily have all in one place unless you're getting this particular model. If you were to assess this in the whole spectrum of Levi's jeans, to me, the 1937 is the hinge point. It's the transition point from the traditional old school Levi from the 1800s into what we think of as the modern Levi jean. So if you were to backtrack from the modern day, you would backtrack from now to the 1966, the 1955, 54Z, right? You would go to the 47 Levi, which is the post-war Levi. You'd go through the World War II Levi's, which went through several iterations. And then when you got to 1937, it's the first time that you would have a lot of features from the modern jeans we're used to, but it would begin to look different than everything that we're used to. If you were to start in the 1800s, 1873, Jacob Davis puts the first rivets on waist overalls. He gets a business partnership with Levi Strauss. They start making what we know as the modern blue jean. You start there, go to 1890, the four-pocket 501, 1922, and when you get to 1937, this is when that old school jean begins to look like the jean that we're used to seeing these days. So to me, this is the hinge point. It's my favorite. You might be into other historical details if you're into vintage denim. Maybe your preference is the 1922, which still has the suspender buttons on the waistband. If you tend more towards the traditional look, or maybe you're thinking the 36, which is the year before this, which was the first year that they came out with this red tab. Maybe that's your preference. This is my preference, the 1937. But I guess what I'm saying is some of the best Levi's jeans, in my opinion, the ones that have the most amount of interesting features are the ones in that era, the 1930s, the 1922 model going into the 30s, the 36 and the 37, the pre-war jeans. These are my favorite. And I think they have the most compelling design, the most unique design out of all of the Levi jeans. And I would even say out of all of the historic jeans that I've ever seen. And I've had a decent amount of exposure to these. Michael Harris's book, Jeans of the Old West, has dozens of pairs from all these different companies. Most of the companies have now gone out of business. But of course, you're also going to see Lee and Levi and the like. There's Wrangler as well, but they're newer. Big fan of Wrangler, but they don't have quite the same thing going on as these. The Lee 101 Rider jean looks similar to this, but there's just something about that classic Levi look with the 2-horse patch and the red tab that really gets me. And so for that reason, I didn't want to go for a reproduction. Usually I go for a reproduction from a company like TCB. I think Connor's Sewing Factory is awesome. My friend Jake, Almost Vintage Style, is always talking about them. Full Count, Warehouse, different companies like that. But for this, I really wanted an actual Levi with the Levi arcuate and the red tab and the 2-horse patch, because I wanted this to be as close as possible to the original. And that is what is so cool about LVC, is that you're not really buying a reproduction. I see it as a reproduction when one of those companies like TCB or Warehouse is making one of these. With Levi's, because they are the actual company who used to make these back in 1937, I view this as like a re-release, like a remake. It'd be like if Chevrolet said, you know what? We are going to re-release the 1965 Chevy Fleetside pickup. And we're going to make it to all the original specs with the same metal and everything, as close as possible. We're not going to modernize it except for maybe giving you like better air conditioning and stuff. But this is going to be as if you walked onto a car lot in the year 1965 and said, I'll take one of those mint green Chevys, please. So that's basically what LVC is doing. So I think sometimes they get bashed on because they're not as accurate as some of these Japanese reproduction companies. And I would agree with that. They aren't quite as accurate. They're pretty accurate, but they're not as perfectly accurate as some of these companies that have influence from private collectors who have access to these vintage jeans and they're matching them stitch for stitch. under essentially a microscope. So yeah, they're not as accurate always, but they are like 95, 99% accurate. And it's the original company. It's a remake. It's like a re-release. And so I love that they're doing this for fans. This is the highest quality level you're going to find from Levi. If you want the absolute nicest jeans that Levi makes, you don't go Levi Premium. You don't go Levi's Made and Crafted. You go LVC, Levi's Vintage Clothing. I think it's a fantastic thing. And part of what you get is not just the remake. It's this historical appeal. It's this, I guess, vintage experience, for lack of a better term. So here's what I mean. They package these jeans in such a way that you feel like you stepped back into time. So it's not the same feeling as if you found a vintage garment on eBay, okay? It's not the same feeling as if you bought a reproduction from a reproduction company. What they're trying to get you to feel as you're opening this, as you're unboxing, unpackaging this particular pair of jeans or anything like it from LVC, is what would it have felt like if you lived in 1937? Or if you're buying the 44 model or the 47 model, what would it have felt like if you lived in 47? If you lived in 1890 and you were unpackaging this jean? So they go to great lengths to make that first time experience feel a little bit that way. And the way that they do that is with a lot of the literature and tags and stuff that come with this jean. So when you get this jean, you will find this sizing tag here, which that's kind of the modern part. There's also like a hang tag here that explains what this is a little bit. That's a little bit modern. On this leather patch, you see some of the sizing info, waist and length. That's a little bit modern. But everything else on this jean is supposed to feel like the original. So in this left side back pocket, you find this envelope addressed to the owner of these jeans. That's you. That's the person who's bought it. And it's in this beautiful vintage feeling, like pressed paper parchment envelope with matching paper inside. And it's sewed into the jeans. All these tags that I'm talking about, that letter, the sizing tag up here, the pocket flasher that's across the back pocket here, they're all sewn in with cotton thread. They're not those little plastic modern, tag fasteners that you normally find. It's thread, like it used to be, right? So this letter is sewn into the back left pocket. You cut the thread, you pull it out, you open it, and what you find is the historical context for these jeans. They want you to feel a little bit like the person who's walking into a store. Maybe you're a construction worker, and you go and you buy these jeans, and no one has to explain to you what life is like in 1937. You have firsthand experience with the Great Depression. You know the politicians of the day from the last 20 years, Calvin Coolidge, Woodrow Wilson, Warren Harding. You know what the New Deal is with FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, right? The Golden Gate Bridge just got finished being constructed, held together with rivets, just like this jean is held together with rivets. And maybe you literally live in or near San Francisco, and so you've seen this take place. You are a construction worker for the time. This is not something you're buying for style or fashion. You just want the best jean you can possibly buy for your day job. And so you walk in and you buy a pair of jeans just like this. And that's what that letter is designed to set up that historical context so you can kind of put yourself in the shoes of someone who would be buying these jeans. And so along with that, you read the letter, and then in this back right pocket, you will see on the face of it the original pocket flasher. People weren't really using pocket flashers before this, or at least not Levi. And they put this pocket flasher on. It's a reprint of the original from 1937, and it says the rivet is still there because this is the first year that they were using hidden rivets. Up until this point, Levi had exposed rivets on either side of each back pocket, and customers were complaining that these rivets were scratching their saddles and their furniture and their motorcycle seats or whatever. And so finally, Levi's addressed this issue and they hid the rivets underneath these patch pockets. So they're still there, adding that strength that you need to keep the pocket intact, but they're not visible and they're not scratching everything. And so just like someone in 1937, you see that original pocket flasher. You also get the Levi's certificate of authenticity that, as far as I know, I guess is the idea that you would have gotten with this pair of jeans. And so, yeah, they want it to be like, you live in the 1930s, you go buy this pair, and this is what the opening, the unboxing, the unpackaging experience would have been like. Something like, okay, close, as close as you can get here in the year 2025 to them. So that is one of the cool things about LVC. If you buy another pair from them that's from a little later on, so you should say you're buying like a 1955 501 from LVC, maybe the experience isn't quite as cool. But for some of these really interesting models, like an 1890 or a 1915 or a 1937 or a mid-war jean, I think that LVC experience is something you're going to want to think about before you go buy a reproduction. I just think that's like this added level of fun, and it makes every dollar worth it. Not only are these really well crafted, and I'll go into that later, but that experience it's second to none. It's top shelf. It's in a class of its own. I think that really bears mentioning and consideration. Okay, so let me get into some of the other historical details here and just some of the other distinct features of this jean. You'll see this arcuate here across the back pocket. It's the classic Levi arcuate. However, this is a single needle stitch instead of double. And so you get, again, that ultra vintage look that you're only going to find on the older Levi's. Also, you have the red tab. As I said earlier, in 1936, the year before this jean was released, they started using this red tab to identify that this is a Levi. It's not a Lee. It's not a Wrangler. Wrangler wasn't around. Casey Jones, Hudson Overall Company, Greenbaum Brothers, all their competitors, right? This is a Levi. And they want you to be able to see that from 100 yards away. Like, oh, I see that red tab 50 yards, 20 yards, however far away you can see this tab from. And now universally, we all know that. You don't even have to be a total denim head, a jean psycho like I am to know that. Everyone sees the red tab, they're like, oh, that's a Levi. The interesting thing about this, though, is the original red tab starting in 1936 had all caps, capital L, capital E, capital V, capital I, capital S. And once you got to 1971, they changed it to be a capital L and then lowercase for the rest of the word. For vintage collectors, this is a really big deal. And I love that on this pair, they reproduced that original all caps Levi tag. Of course, you get the 2-horse patch. It's got 2 horses running in opposite directions, trying to pull these jeans apart. And the classic statement on that is Levi's would say, you know, can't rip them or can't bust them or something like that because they're so strong because of the rivets. So that's a nice classic detail. You have the back cinch here, which back in those days, you would size them differently than I did. I sized down a little bit for a slightly slimmer modern fit, but these were construction worker jeans, and often, especially in the 1800s, they would wear these over their other pants. So this is not necessarily the only pant you would wear. You'd wear it over your nicer clothing, and then when you would go home from your dirty day job, you'd take these off, sometimes even leave them on the job site or in the mine, and come back and get them in the morning. And so they would size these a lot bigger than we size our modern jeans. So there was a big wide fit, and to get them to fit right, you would cinch this back cinch. This is a spike cinch. So it's got these 2 tines and they stab through the fabric as opposed to a tension cinch. We've all seen like a tension buckle of some kind, maybe like the adjuster on the straps of your backpack. That's tension. This is a spike cinch where it actually stabs through the fabric. One of the cool things about this one is, once again, with LVC, it's all about that vintage experience, that historical experience. Kind of like back in the day when these would have been new, back in actual 1937, those 2 tines come with a little bar between them. And it's kind of like a seal of authenticity. It is the seal that shows you that it's new. Kind of like opening a water bottle. If the seal is cracked, you know it's not new. If the buckle's been cut, if the bar's been cut from the 2 tines, you know these jeans have been used. And so it's kind of like this, act of privilege to be able to get this new pair, and you're the one that takes a pair of pliers and you cut that bar out from between the 2 tines. Really nice detail, really small detail, but it adds to the whole thing. This back cinch is held on by box stitches with a diamond stitch here, or triangle stitch, whatever you want to call it, and reinforced with rivets just like the original. One of the differences in this garment as opposed to the ones before it is the transition to belt loops. People weren't using belts. People weren't using belt loops until you got to the 1900s. So if you look at pictures of miners from the 1800s wearing Levi's, and other pairs of waist overalls, because originally these were not called jeans, that came back into vogue in about the 1950s. The 1800s, the early 1900s, up until the 1950s, these were called waist overalls. Anyways, you see pictures of these miners, and they either are just using the back cinch to get it tight enough to not fall down, or they're taking a rope and they're just putting it around their waist and tying the rope really tight. If they're not doing that, then what they're doing is using suspenders, which is why these are called waist overalls. Instead of a full overall, which has straps built into it, these are waist overalls. Overalls, they go over your other clothing, that's why it's called an overall, and then has suspender buttons so that you can hang these at the waist height instead of chest height and be comfortable and work and have this protected clothing. So this is a new thing. This is when Levi made the decision to give you these optional press-on metal suspender buttons. If you just couldn't live without your suspenders that you like wearing, they would come with this so you could press them on yourself, but they wouldn't come like that from the factory. This is the first time that happened. The 1936 pair, the 1922 model, they still had those suspender buttons. So again, this is like the transition point into modernity, at least as we know it. This fabric is supposed to be somewhat reminiscent of the original fabric. Probably not an absolutely perfect reproduction, but LVC is really trying to do a good job of being as historically accurate as possible. And so this denim is somewhat uniform when it comes to the right-hand twill. And you're not going to find a lot of slub, maybe a little bit of slub, but you are going to find a lot of what I call knots and nep. Okay, so it's like these little tags. So it has a lot of texture. This has a lot of vintage appeal as far as both the color and that texture that I'm talking about. This denim is 100% organic cotton, and it is unsanforized. It's raw. And so these are shrink to fit jeans, which again is a vintage experience. We don't do that anymore. I don't know when they stopped doing shrink to fit as the main kind. I think sanforization was invented in like the 70s. No. By the time we got to like the 90s, nobody was wearing shrink to fit pretty much, right? It was like, unless you're a crazy denim head, 99% of the human population, we're all wearing sanforized denim. But this is an original shrink to fit garment. We'll talk about sizing for this in just a little bit, but I just want to cover some of the other details first. In 1915, we had what we call the Golden Handshake. This is the gentleman's agreement between Cone Mills and Levi's. Cone Mills had decided they were going to be the main ones who would provide fabric for Levi. And so there's this decades-long business partnership between Levi's and Cone Mills. And one of the ways that you have a vintage pair of Levi's, in addition to all the other more obvious details, is Cone Mills is famous for their red salvage ID tag. They always used red. And so, of course, this pair being an LVC product, they had to have that. And so that's a really cool vintage detail as well. Going along with that, you're going to have a chain-stitched hem like all vintage jeans have. Up until the modern day, they weren't really using that straight stitch. They were using this chain stitch, and that's how you get the really cool roping effect. The thread is the classic Levi gold mixed with yellow. This is poly thread. So that's one area where they deviate from the actual vintage pair. Vintage pairs are made with cotton thread. That's really cool. It has a good look to it as it breaks down, but the problem is it breaks down, and so your jeans are literally falling apart. If you use poly core thread, it's like poly in the middle, and then it's got cotton wrapped around it. You get somewhat of the look of cotton thread, not quite, but somewhat of the look, but you get this extra durability. These last way longer. I'm a big fan of that. I don't need my reproduction jeans to have cotton thread anymore for me to feel that vintage appeal. I'm totally good with poly thread. If you are super, super hardcore vintage though, you probably won't like that. But I think for most people that's a plus because you get to wear these, you get to use these without them falling apart as quickly. And then other than that, you have some of the standard features which you'd probably expect from a vintage style jean. You've got the button fly with 4 buttons. You've got the shield coin pocket. It's the shape of a shield coin pocket that's salvage lined at the lip. Those front pockets and that coin pocket and all the other normal locations, they have rivets to strengthen them. You have the classic crotch rivet, which you see on this, and they lost in World War II. World War II, you lose the back cinch, you lose the crotch rivet, they're gone forever. One of the other reasons I love this model so much, you've got all the most exciting features of Levi's all in one jean, including that crotch rivet, including that back cinch. And lastly, one of the things that isn't a vintage detail is on the pocket bag inside, you'll see this Levi's vintage clothing decal. And of course, that's just modern branding. And I'm fine with that. I think that's great. I think they should be proud of what they're doing. I'm proud of having their jean. So go ahead, stencil it onto the pocket bag. I love it. The LVC line currently is being made in Japan with Japanese materials, like the denim here is from a mill in Japan. And so for anybody who's concerned about that, because in the Amakaji heritage clothing world, being made in Japan is like this mark of authenticity. It's a mark of quality. And I think you will be pleased with this pair. Not only are they made in Japan, but they live up to that reputation. If you start looking over all the seams and the stitch work and the way the pattern's cut and the way that the fit is designed, this is an excellent pair of jeans. As I said earlier, it's worth every dollar. I don't know about the other ones they make, but the 1937 I think is worth every dollar that Levi's is charging you for all that quality and this vintage appeal. Okay, so the last thing I need to talk about is the sizing. Shrink to fit can be really scary if you've never done that before. If you have no experience with unsanforized, that can be really unnerving, especially if you go to the Levi's website and you find that their sizing information is not as exact as a lot of other Amakaji brands. But here's the thing. I think what's going on here is their sizing info is actually really, it's great. It's easy, it's intuitive. But many of us, myself included, before I got into LVC, we overcomplicate things. We're used to being able to micromanage our fit with all these crazy sizing charts from our raw denim. So we get to LVC and we go, oh, this sizing info sucks. When in reality, yes, you can't get the specific like thigh and knee and hem measurement and all that, front rise, back rise. But what they're doing is they're like taking the guesswork out of it, which I think for 90% of the population is going to be a good thing. So here's how you do it, in my opinion. Instead of living in raw denim land where you measure every little dimension of the jeans, I think you need to backtrack a little bit and literally just get your Levi size. Most everyone in the world has the opportunity to at least try on some Levi's. I've been to Asia, I've been to Europe, I've been to the African continent, all over the US, all over North America. And in most places, you can at least order some Levi's and then return them if you don't want them. Or you can physically go into a store. Even if you can't afford to buy them, you can go try them on. Not all places, but a lot of places you have access to this kind of thing, okay? So the best thing to do is literally just go find your Levi's size. Obviously, some of this has to do with finding the right cut. Clearly, if you've got like a bigger body or bigger proportions, maybe you lift, maybe you've got bigger thighs or something, then you're gonna have to go for certain cuts, like maybe the 5'4'1". Whereas if you're skinnier, then you can go for like a 5'11" or something like that, a 5'02". But find a cut that works for you. And once you find the cut that works for your body shape and type, find your Levi size. It should be the same in any of the fits they have that fit you. So like in a 505 and a 514 and a 501, etc. I'm a 32-30. I have a 33-inch waist, usually about a 30-inch inseam. I'm 5'10", 170 pounds, about a 42-inch chest, depending on what time of year it is, right? And 18-inch, 19-inch shoulder. And I'm wearing a 32-30. So I just go to my local Levi outlet. I try on some jeans. Yeah, some of those fits fit me better than others. I don't really like their modern 501. The 505 fits a little better. I like the 514 a lot. If I want a wider leg, I go with something else. But in most of them, I'm a 32-30. And here's kind of what I think of this. If you want more like a modern slim fit, then you should do what I did. You should get your true size in the waist and then just add 2 inches in the inseam. So I usually get a 32-30. In this, I got a 32-32. The waistband's gonna stretch back out. So yes, when you first throw these in the wash, they're going to shrink and they'll be a little too small. But really quickly, I'm talking like the first 15 minutes, that waistband stretches back out. You wear them for 2 days, they're definitely gonna stretch back out. and that gets you a nice slim fit in the top block and kind of straight legs, but they're a little bit slimmer as well. And that inseam is going to come up like 2 inches at least. It's going to shrink about 2 inches. And they're pretty good with the sizing info. Like, they're not going to accidentally shrink 4 inches on you or anything. Don't worry about that. Pretty much dead nuts. They're going to shrink 2 inches on the dot and stop shrinking. And I know that because I chucked mine in 2 hot washes and then turned them inside out and threw them in the dryer cycle on high. So I got all the shrink out, and I only got like maybe a hair over 2 inches of shrinkage in that inseam, and the waistband fits me just fine. So that's what you do if you want that modern fit. If you want more of a modern relaxed fit, then I would say do the same thing with the inseam, go 2 inches longer than you're gonna want it in the end result, but then maybe add 1 size to the waistband, and it'll shrink a little less. You'll have a little more room, maybe for looks, or maybe you have, again, larger thighs and stuff than I do. I'm pretty skinny, pretty rail thin. I've got no butt. And then if you want an ultra vintage fit, if you want these to look more like what they actually are supposed to look like, then you need to go 2 sizes up in the waist, and again, 2 inches longer in the inseam as well. So if I was gonna go for a relaxed fit, I would get a 33-32. If I was going to go for that big vintage fit, I would do a 34-32. But I wanted that more modern fit for this particular pair, so I went 32-32. The inseam shrunk up, and then the waist is what it is. There's the different methods of shrinking this. I think regardless of what method you use, you kind of should follow my sizing advice. That's my opinion. Some people would probably disagree, but I think we're splitting hairs when we start talking about how you're going to wash them. So all my stuff, I use a washing machine. No spin or no agitation anyways. So I do a delicate cycle, and I wash these inside out. If I use the dryer, which is not often, I also do it inside out on low heat, unless I'm trying to get a ton of shrinkage out, and then I put it on high heat. But I think whether you do that or whether you leave them on your body and sit and soak in the bathtub, which I think is a little ridiculous, but if you like that, then hey, have fun. They're your jeans. You should have fun, do what you want. But like, whether you do that with the bathtub, or you throw them in the washing machine, or you just do a tub soak where you just leave them in a vat of water or something and then hang dry them or whatever, eventually they'll get to this size, okay? If you keep washing them, usually, eventually, they'll continue shrinking until they've basically reached the size that I have. You know, I guess you could say maybe not if somebody's really, really delicately cold soaking them and they're super religious about not doing it wrong or whatever, but most people, that's not your real life. So I think if you were to take a guy that tub soaked his, a guy that sat in the tub with his, and take another guy like me who's throwing them in the washing machine, and you track our jeans, a year later, if they all started out as the same size, a year later, all of our jeans would have kind of like shrunk to the same size. The dimensions of all 3 pairs of jeans would be like the same. So I don't believe in, you know, like doing this whole like size differently depending on what wash method you're using. But if you have other experience and you think that the card that Levi gave with this for washing instructions is correct, then tell me in the comments. Like, I'm happy to be wrong. I haven't tried all the ways, but I've tried many ways. And that's been my experience with all the different unsanforized jeans that I've had. And I've probably had like 5 to 7 pairs in all different brands. And so I think I know what I'm talking about, at least a little bit. Yeah, so I just think you should kind of follow my sizing advice, honestly. It takes the guesswork out of it. And for most people, you're going to want to throw it in the washing machine anyways. Like that's what's easy. That's what makes sense in the modern life that we all have. And so tub soaking is cool and all, but like I don't think you're really gaining any advantage by doing that. And if you have a pair of jeans where they'll shrink on you and they won't fit anymore if you don't wash them absolutely perfectly, then you're probably forcing a pair of jeans to work that wasn't really meant to be used by you. Like you shouldn't have to like absolutely baby a pair of jeans and go super OCD on the washing process just to be able to use them, right? Like you should have a little margin for error. Otherwise, is that even practical for your lifestyle? That's my opinion, but maybe you're, nerding out over all these crazy wash methods and that's part of the fun for you. So if that's you, just keep going. But anyways, that's how I kind of break down this sizing information and kind of demystify it. Because when I was going into this, getting these I looked all over the internet, the raw denim subreddit, YouTube, all that, and people have all these different ideas about how to size these, and what I kind of boil it down to is what I told you a moment ago. So anyways, that's my review on the 1937 Levi 501. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. And as I always say, let your jeans take you places more important than the jeans themselves. We'll see you on the next video.